So let's continue with our next speakers. David Rieger and Christian Pichler will give a presentation on navigating innovation and compliance in AI product development. I think I will let you introduce yourselves and please enjoy this next talk.
All right, all set?
Looks good. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining that session. And by the way, sir, interesting question about the responsibility and who's responsible for what at the end of the day. So yeah, my name is Christian Pichler, a computer scientist by education. Worked in different domains over the past 25 years, from space to electronic data interchange, from corporates and scale-ups. At the moment, running management consulting, and at the same time also being the CTO of Anyline in Vienna. And with me today is David, but you better introduce yourselves.
Of course, thank you very much. So yeah, hi, my name is David Rieger. I'm working also at Anyline, but also in general, I'm working on other projects in the area of AI, but also privacy and information security and other legal compliance topics. And my background is a bit not so technical as Christian's. I'm more from the compliance area. I worked a long time as a consultant in information security compliance. Also now I'm working at the JKU on the legal aspects of artificial intelligence, software compliance, and things like that. And yeah, so I'm a bit the organizational counterpart, if you want, to Christian in this context. But maybe let's start with his part, because it sets the tone a bit better for the next slides.
Thank you. That reflects our relationship, and glad we got a mic so I can throw it at him, because we regularly have quite intense discussions, because I'm a techie, I want to build, and then he's like right in my neck. So what I want to share with you in the next couple of minutes in a very brief way is that looking back, now that almost 10 years of developing AI products, like I said, in corporate and scale-up environments, it's funny enough, and I can say it as an engineer, most of the aspects are actually not related to tech at all at the beginning. And I want to share with you what we learned over the last 10 years. So I want to organize this, because it's going to be a lot of information. I want to organize it for you along 3 dimensions. It's about defining what you actually want to do. It's about creating it. What are the aspects you really need to look after in very much detail when you create, and then what's important from a leadership perspective, especially in building AI products. So let's look at the definition first. By the way, images are all directly from my phone. So Craig goes to my phone. So it's about, what do we want to do? Throughout my entire life, I've been in so many discussions, and we talk about features. And we're going to build this killer feature. We're going to build this feature. And engineers like to build features at the end of the day. But what we really need to talk about, and that's also especially important in the context of AI products, what is the value you want to create? I know value is like one of those other buzzwords all the time, but let's make it a bit tangible. And again, I usually quote books. I don't earn a single cent with if you read that book, but I do quote the books that I really enjoyed, that I thought that helped myself a lot. That one is by Josh Seiden, Outcomes Over Output. And it's a very thin book. He promises you that you can read it in 40 minutes. Not true. It took me 2 weeks because I kept reiterating over every single page. And what he describes is that you really need to look at, when you create value, you have outputs, the tangible stuff, code, whatever it is. You have outcomes, a change in behavior, and then at the end of the day, you create an impact. Like, give you a brief example from the, let's say, I don't know, traffic domain, right? We could say, let's build an intersection with 3 lanes, 2 zebra crossings, 5 lights, to make the intersection a safer place to be. That would be one definition. The other way of looking at it would be, let's build an intersection with being able to, I don't know, pass 50 cars a minute and 0 deaths on this intersection. Yeah? That is the difference you need to make, and that will really also help you tons in finding proper tech solutions. So don't talk about features, but talk about the value. It not only helps to align within the engineering team, but also across the company, with management, with our stakeholders, with product. That was the first insight. The next one, that is not going to be a surprise for you, and you probably all think like, okay, data, that's like a no-brainer. That is very true, but if I've learned one thing, and it cannot be said often enough, it's the quality of the data that you look after. We spent a lot of money, to be honest, in multiple roles, multiple positions, just like re-annotating, reorganizing, throwing stuff away, recollecting data, and that can really turn into a problem very, very quickly, as I'm sure many of you can probably witness from each of your own works. So this is something you should really think of from the very day, not only from the way your data is organized, the way you curate it, but also from a perspective of compliance perspective, GDPR, for instance. Yeah. So if you work with IDs, etc., if you think these aspects from the beginning, they're not that bad. Second topic I want to touch in the context of creating, it's iteration. And here again, a book that may be familiar to many of you, because it's in fact a classic, but Reese with the Lean Startup, or the Startup Way for corporates. Yeah? It's about when you build software, just don't hide yourselves for months, but just do quick experiments. Yeah? Make sure you can run experiments, you got your environment set up that you can test, validate things within not even days or weeks, but within hours. Yeah? They can run experiments very, very quickly, automate it on a regular basis, and then also take it from there. That is the second insight when you create stuff. Genau.
Yeah, but Christian, one important... Give me the phone. One important question, because you now mentioned basically how especially younger organizations will probably come up with an idea how they make their best to develop products in the AI space that provide some value, provide some outcome, and actually do what they should do. But in the end, I'm also here a bit the compliance guy, right? So how, for example, would I trust everything that you said, and how do I make sure, as from a compliance perspective, that what you just built with your great team actually fulfills the purpose in a way it should fulfill, and that we do not suddenly risk some accident behavior or sudden misdevelopments across the organization? Do you have an answer for that? I hope so. Yeah?
See, I told you, he's the pain in my neck. No, but it's true. And that's in fact the conversations we have quite regularly. But it's very, very true. And what we really so far in the products we built and developed, and you recognize again, you know, the build, measure, learn, or train, evaluate, learn. You really also, in the products we built, despite from any automated, you know, evaluations, regression tests, whatever there may be out there, apart from this, we have a human somewhere in the loop. So if this is, for instance, in a, if we take the, again, the traffic, the tolling domain, right? It's when you monitor, I don't know, traffic flows, highways, tolling systems. What you do is you have on a large scale evaluations, right? You take periods of time, you look at the data, you look how is it working in the field, or you actually take the users. If you look at more customer, like, you know, end user facing products, you take the users somewhere into the loop. Yeah. So you really not only build and you learn and then you train again, I don't know, build new features, improve, but you actually put the user somewhere in this loop, yeah, to confirm, to decline, or run regular field evaluations. Yeah. So that is really key to not only, despite any regulatory and compliance fulfillments we need to take, but at the end of the day, you need to also get the person, get the involved people into this loop. Very, very key. And last but not least, before handing over to you, David, to give us a bit of shed the light on all the regulations we have to comply with, it's the environment. Yeah. So we talked about finding a language that we communicate, we know what we want to build. We talked about two aspects I really want you to remember, even though this sounds so obvious, but they're so important, yeah? Quality of the data, experimenting quickly, getting quick feedback loops, and putting people into this loop. But last but not least, it's the environment for the teams, for the people. And in fact, I was one corporate. We had a new innovative idea. In fact, it was, again, a deep learning-based system, and at that point, it was actually building an entire ecosystem, corporate with multiple thousand people. And back then, it's like, just growing a new seed somewhere in a large corporate, it can just, be gone very quickly if not taken care of properly. And so in corporates, it's always a good idea. And in fact, back then, I approached the CTO and was like, look, if we want to do this, give me a new office 5 kilometers away from this location where this young seed, this little plant, is basically not affected by the corporate itself, because it's new, you don't know it, people don't know it, and it's really like, I don't know, it feels like a bot, right? It's an immune system, right? It starts to attack the new things. So if that's something I want you to remember this, yeah? And at the same time, if you look at scale-up startups, it's the opposite around. There is enough room for experiments, but reinforce it in your people. Reinforce it in the people, that it's good to have experiments and that it's good that you can also fail. It's not always that we know that it works, that's great. It's as valid that we know it doesn't work. And with this, that was at the very high level of what I wanted to share with you tonight. And with this, I want to hand over to David.
Thank you very much. Now to the immune system part. Yeah, because as you perfectly explained now, it's one thing to build innovation, to actually drive innovation in your organization, your team, to come up with new products. And of course, it's also important, or I would say it's key to have the right environment. And I think the example you just gave was very good with the whole corporate environment, where you more or less feel like there's an immune system in place that more or less kills every innovation or every seed of innovation there is. On the other hand, at the startups, it's exactly the opposite. There's actually no rules and everything develops and grows as it just wants. Which is sometimes good if you want to get fast running things. But on the other hand, there might be also a bit downside. And I'm here to talk about the downside, basically, or basically how to make it less of a downside. Because the key question I always ask Christian when he works with his team, or other person in the form of a CTO, what about compliance? And what do I mean by that? Well, I think the best thing is to first illustrate a little bit with an example. Why this whole compliance topic is such an important thing, especially in the AI area. Because when you now would buy a car, you normally expect it to fulfill certain normal criteria, right? You want the brakes to work, you want to have 4 wheels, you want to make sure that everything is up to road safety standards. If it is not, then you normally would think somebody should compensate you for that claim, right? At the same time, we're now moving a bit in a new area because we give software and AI-based software more and more influence on our daily lives, including for such critical areas like cars, where we now would also need to trust the self-driving software on board, that it not suddenly decides to let us crash with 100 kilometers per hour against the wall and kill us. Because of course, yeah, I mean, for the corporate, it's not that much of a problem anymore because you cannot claim anything anymore, but on the other hand, it's also not great. So we have to think a bit, how do we prevent such situations? And I mean, there is no gold standard, right? There's not one thing you can do, and it's always a bit of an individual basis. But in general, when we work together, CTOs, CISOs, DPOs, you name it, I think it's always good to cluster it in 3 different areas you normally want to address. You want to have clear expectations in your organization, across your team members, across the stakeholders of your organization. Then you want to actually go to the whole maintenance, to the maintain compliance part, where to make sure that whatever you build, whatever you run, actually fulfills all the compliance requirements you're having. That can range from various different areas, but I will try to give a very quick overview about it, though, of course, this is the much more complex part because it varies very much on what you're doing. And last but not least, and that comes back to Christian's last point, because in the end, it's also my last point, basically, that you can make sure that every rule is in place. You can make sure that the processes are in place. But in the end, you need to have the people there that make sure that everything is done on a daily basis and not just a one-time exercise. So you have to have somehow the right environment, and you have to establish the governance. And to make it very quick, so what are those 3 areas now about? Well, the first one is basically what Christian already covered. Because the same way when you talk about innovation and you talk about compliance, first thing should always be that you have a clear understanding of what you actually want to achieve. What does compliance mean for you in the AI area? For example, what are the terms actually used? I, for example, have the difficulty because I'm not that much into the technical background sometimes, that I need to understand what exactly do you mean by a model, or what do you mean by the data you're going to process. Is it basically the weights you're meaning right now, or is it more the data that is used on the first part? That's very important to clarify first, because it leads to confusion on the long term. And the whole motivation and the outcomes, I think that's already quite good covered by Christian's part anyways, because you have to understand what do you want to achieve with the solution you're building in the first place. Else, how do we check if it's compliant? It means something completely different if you're building, like for example, we heard the whole health recommendation system that gives you more or less indication if you took the right medication or not, versus you try to classify pictures of animals. And it all comes down basically then in the compliance area to one important thing, and that is managing risks. And don't get too anxious about this slide. I know it's a lot of things there, but I think there are 2 important aspects to concern. Normally, when talking about risks, you have 2 different things to consider when talking about AI in that context, and that is on one hand, the risks for your AI system you're building, and the other one is what is the actual risk it means for your environment. And the environment part, of course, becomes much more complicated nowadays. Even so complicated that the European Union decided in some way or another, can be criticized of course, but to come up with a first little framework of classifying risks in the form of this AI Act, as probably a lot of people already heard over the last year, which more or less gives us a first indication of what is okay, what is not so okay. Yeah, and of course, more or less already coming mostly to an end. When you thought about your risks for your system, for what it means for your environment, then you should, as an organization, come up more or less with some kind of idea how to mitigate such risks if they are not really acceptable for you or for your environment or for the entire population maybe. And that is, on one hand, the security for your system first, the safety for the people around you, and of course, if you have some specific requirements like healthcare and so on, for the specific compliance parts. Good, but as we mentioned before, everything needs then also to be put in practice, put into the heads of people, and they need to make sure that they understand what they're doing. And that's why it's so important to establish some kind of accountability throughout every organization that works and develops AI systems, especially in critical areas, because you need to make sure that the people understand the consequences of the products they're building, and that they are also feel responsible on an individual basis and not delegate important skills, important decisions completely to machines. So far, so good. As a bit of a shocking last slide, I thought I put everything together. How do you establish this governance? Well, you could use a very complicated framework that you build for yourself, like I sometimes had to do for customers, or we had to do for ourselves sometimes. Or even better, you refer to a lot of standard sources and use what they already built, like Microsoft and the German Ethikrat was very active in that area. And also the NIST in the US, of course, has a lot of good standards in the recent times published, which gives you already a very good indication how to tackle this challenge of compliance. And that's it. Thank you very much. And, well, back to you, Christian, I guess.
To both of us, I guess. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot for this nice presentation. Any questions from the audience? I have a question myself. Perhaps I can be so bold as to jump in immediately. So what interests me in this whole compliance story is the role of explainable AI, because you can test a system and show that it works, but if you don't really know how it works, how trustworthy is it?
A good question, and probably one that cannot really be answered completely at this point, because it's still not 100% certain. Because in the end, what you're asking about is a bit, what do we indicate as a properly understand system, as an AI system that can also be assured to always produce a level of result that we can use, for example, also in critical decisions, like when the doctor gets a recommendation from the system and understands what should I do with my patient. And there is not a clear threshold at this point. The thing is, I mean, one approach to this would be to try to come always up that the authority and the authorization of actions that impact either directly or indirectly the human being behind whatever solution you're building must be accountable to a person at some point. And if the answer is that that person cannot really comprehend how the answer is produced in the first place, then it's normal indication that this shouldn't be the case at the moment. On the other hand, with this kind of approach, you will probably prevent a lot of AI use cases from the beginning on. That's why it's, I think, one of the most crucial parts to build safe testing environments. And that's also a bit what Christian mentioned with the whole running and testing and also having human oversight about all the solutions, because in the end, we have to have even more crucial and reliable training records, training results in place before we can move on with systems like AI, because we simply cannot completely understand and predict the outcome every time, which makes it, of course, very difficult in that sense.
Okay, thanks a lot. Good answer. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
So I mean, I have no idea about compliance, but I understand it's like a legal obligation that you fulfill some criteria towards different institutions. How stable is the compliance landscape in AI? Because, okay, now there's the AI Act, and now we know what we can expect now for the next 5 years. This is what companies need to fulfill, or can it be in 2 years there will be new compliance rules, and suddenly the business, or like the business idea of a lot of startups will not be possible anymore because they are not allowed to do that anymore?
Honest answer, or the...
Honest answer, of course.
Well, the honest answer is not that much stability. But not because I think you always have to think how fast is legislation, regulation moving. And the answer is normally pretty slow, because especially nowadays you have so many different instances who have discussions and have to find a consent that we're talking about normally years until you find a solution to something that the technology area already found a solution in a few minutes. I mean, we normally saw probably a lot presentations today how fast results can be produced with Gen AI, that it's simply hard to understand, also hard to imagine that regulation and legislation can really keep up with this development that easily. So the answer is not that much stability. The other hand, of course, is that we at least got a bit of an indication now. Also with things like the AI Act, or also the NIST did very good work in the US, giving us a rough indication of what the company should do, or rather should avoid when building AI-based systems. That helps us at least to have an indication of what you should at least consider. If you did not even consider to think about those criteria mentioned there, then of course the chances are quite high that at some point you will be confronted with argumenting why you didn't consider it, and that might actually be then the end if you have absolutely no idea of what you're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. With that, I would also like to end this second round of speeches. I have gifts for you both.
Perfect.
That's the advantage of giving a presentation with
Thank
two
you
people.
very much.
Thank you.
So another round of applause for the people.